Before you could speak, before your first breath turned into sound, you were immersed in something infinite. The infant's gaze does not know where it ends and where the world begins. It sees movement, light, texture, a seamless ocean of being. There are no names yet, no borders, no things, only presence, only the vast pulse of existence, uncut and untamed. This is what it meant to be truly alive, to live in direct communion with what is. But then, one day, a sound came, and the sound had a meaning. A finger pointed at the glowing orb above and said, "Sun." And with that single word, a boundary was drawn across the sky. The immeasurable became measurable. The radiant became labeled. The mystery became a concept. That was the first thread of the invisible net being woven around your mind. We are told that language is what separates us from animals, that it is the crown of our evolution. But perhaps it is also our fall from Eden, the moment we traded direct experience for description. Words are not neutral. They sculpt perception. They tell you where to look, what to see, what to ignore. The moment a word is attached to a thing, the infinite facets of that thing collapse into one manageable idea. The roaring complexity of what is gets translated into the simplicity of what we say it is. And the tragedy is that we begin to believe the translation. We confuse the menu for the meal. We build our reality from sound and symbol, forgetting that it was never reality we built, but a cage. Imagine you are walking through a forest. You see trees, leaves, light scattering through the canopy. But notice the instant you think tree, you stop truly seeing. The word becomes a veil over the raw phenomenon. The living explosion of form and color gets replaced by a single mental stamp. Tree. It is efficient, yes, but deadly to wonder. Every time we name something, we kill its uniqueness. The word standardizes the miracle. What's left is a manageable abstraction, the world as a dictionary, not as a revelation. This is the invisible net, a web of words that pretends to explain the world, but only partitions it into boxes of understanding. We think in language, so we rarely see beyond it. We live inside an inherited syntax that tells us what is possible, what is real, what is acceptable to imagine. Every sentence is a miniature cage, and yet we think we are free because the bars are made of sound. We call it communication, but it is also domestication. We are domesticated by the words of our culture, tamed by the grammar of our ancestors. Think of how your entire sense of self depends on language. You say I, and in that instant, a border appears. There is you, and there is everything else. But before that word, before that pronoun, there was no such division. The I is a linguistic illusion, a convenience of speech mistaken for a truth of existence. Without language, would you still be you? Or would you simply be inseparable from the world that breathes you into being? The ego is a sentence that forgot it was written by the cosmos. We learn words before we learn silence, and that is the origin of confusion. Our culture celebrates talkers, thinkers, explainers, those who can articulate the ineffable and turn mystery into knowledge. But language is a poor sculptor of the infinite. It carves reality into manageable statues, lifeless but familiar. We say we understand, but what we really mean is that we have found words that keep us from trembling in front of the unknown. The net comforts us. It gives us the illusion of control. It tells us that we have named the storm and thus tamed it. But the storm doesn't care for names. The universe continues to unfold, wild and wordless, beyond our syllables. The stars don't need to be called stars to burn. The river doesn't need to be called river to flow. It is only we, trapped in the labyrinth of language, who cannot bear the raw, unnamed pulse of existence. We cling to words because silence feels like death. Yet it is in silence that reality speaks most clearly. Every civilization constructs its own linguistic net, each with different patterns and hierarchies. Some cultures have dozens of words for snow, others none. Some languages see time as a line, others as a circle. These are not mere curiosities. They are reflections of how language sculpts perception itself. What you can't say, You can't easily think. What you can't think, you rarely see. And what you don't see, you forget exists. Thus, entire dimensions of being are filtered out by the limits of grammar. Language is not merely a tool we use, it is a habitat we live inside. From birth, we are initiated into this system. Parents repeat words, point to objects, reward recognition. This is a chair. That is a dog. You are a boy. And we learn to mirror their definitions, their worldview. By the time we can form sentences, our minds are already colonized by inherited meanings. We are fluent not just in a language, but in a set of assumptions about self and other, time and space, good and evil, real and unreal. Every culture's first lesson is not how to speak, it is what to believe. And so, we grow up thinking that reality is what fits into words. We forget that there was once a version of us who saw without naming, who lived inside the unfiltered radiance of perception. The child's world was shimmering, alive, limitless, until it was mapped. The map was made of language, and we began to walk the map instead of the terrain. We began to live inside the echo of reality rather than its roar. Terence McKenna often said that culture is not your friend. What he meant was that culture, through language, programs you to perceive only what serves its continuation. It creates a linguistic operating system that keeps you productive, predictable, and contained. Even rebellion is pre-scripted. Even dissent uses the same vocabulary. The net tightens not by force, but by familiarity. You can't escape what you can't perceive as a trap. If you've ever felt that strange yearning, that ache for something beyond what words can touch, that's your spirit remembering the unspoken world. That's the echo of the moment before you learned your first name. There is still a part of you that knows reality is larger than meaning, that life itself refuses to be translated. That part whispers to you in dreams, in silence, in moments of awe when the mind goes blank and the heart trembles before the mystery. That's when the net loosens, just a little, and the infinite peers through. The tragedy of our age is that we mistake fluency for wisdom. We think the one who speaks most beautifully understands most deeply. But eloquence is not enlightenment. It is the artful weaving of the net. The real sages are those who can point beyond language, who can use words as ladders, only to abandon them once the view is reached. The words are not the truth. They are the breadcrumbs leading you back to what was lost, the naked, wordless encounter with being itself. So look around you now. Every thought you think, every emotion you name, every belief you hold, all of it arises within the matrix of language. And yet, somewhere beneath it, you can feel the hum of the unnamed. That hum is the real. It cannot be captured, only remembered. It is the silence beneath speech, the space beneath thought, the vastness that was here before the first word was spoken. The invisible net is not evil. It was born from our longing to connect, to share, to make sense. But it became too successful. The tool turned into a prison. The song of humanity became a loop that repeats itself endlessly, mistaking its echo for the voice of God. To notice this trap is the beginning of awakening. For once you see the bars, you can begin to slip through them, back into the wilderness of the ineffable, back into the place where existence speaks not through language, but through being. That is where freedom begins, not in another word, but in the space between them. We are addicted to understanding. It is our favorite illusion, the narcotic of the modern mind. To understand something gives us a rush of power, a brief relief from the trembling uncertainty of existence. We say, "Ah, I see," and for a moment the chaos of the world seems ordered, domesticated, safe. But what is it we actually see? The understanding we cling to is not reality itself, but the faint shadow of it, a translation written in the alphabet of our conditioning. It feels true because it fits the pattern of our language, not because it reflects the mystery of what is. In the human hunger to make sense, We mistake the echo for the source. We live inside that echo, and we call it knowledge. To understand something is to compress it, to force the infinite into the small boxes of the finite mind. We dissect, label, explain, and congratulate ourselves for conquering the unknown. But the unknown cannot be conquered. It only allows us temporary hallucinations of comprehension. The universe is not a riddle to be solved. It is a story to be lived. Yet we have been trained to prefer the diagram to the experience, the equation to the ecstasy. We've built entire civilizations on the premise that to name is to know, and to know is to control. The problem is that the map is not only smaller than the territory, it is made of entirely different matter. The map is ink, the territory is life. When you look at the ocean, your mind wants to translate it. Water, waves, reflection, horizon. But none of these words touch the truth of it. The ocean cannot be known through categories. The word ocean has no salt, no motion, no breath. The word is an absence wearing the mask of presence. We use words to approximate experience, but over generations, we forget the difference between the approximation and the thing itself. This forgetting is the core of the trap. We think we've reached understanding, but what we've reached is only the end of curiosity. Once the mystery has a name, we stop looking. Once it's been explained, we stop feeling. Language tells us, you already know, and the adventure of perception ends. Understanding is seductive precisely because it mimics awakening. When we understand something intellectually, we get a flash of certainty, a sense that the fog has cleared. But true awakening is the opposite. It is the moment when certainty dissolves, when the fog itself becomes luminous. The intellect wants conclusions, while consciousness wants expansion. The intellect closes the circle, consciousness opens it infinitely. We live in a culture that worships the former and fears the latter. We build institutions around conclusions, hierarchies around certainty. And so we breed a world where people mistake the rigidity of knowledge for the fluidity of wisdom. Consider how we learn science. It begins as an act of wonder, the desire to touch the fabric of existence. But soon, it becomes a cataloguing of phenomena. Equations replace awe. We no longer gaze at the stars, we measure them. The unknown is reduced to data, and data becomes dogma. We say, we understand the universe as though the infinite can fit inside a textbook. But the cosmos is not a mechanism, it is a living imagination. And every act of understanding is merely a snapshot of that imagination from a single angle at a single moment. The next moment, it changes, and our so-called understanding becomes obsolete. Terence McKenna once said that culture is a kind of intellectual virus. It replicates through our minds by convincing us that its symbols are reality. The greatest trick this virus performs is convincing us that understanding is liberation. It tells us that the more we analyze, the more we know, the more free we become. But in truth, the opposite happens. The more we define, the narrower our world becomes. Every definition is a limitation. Every explanation closes a door. The world becomes smaller, not because it actually shrinks, but because our vision does. We live in a hall of mirrors, reflecting our own words back to us, mistaking that echo chamber for the cosmos. Even in our relationships, understanding becomes a substitute for presence. We think we know people because we can describe them, their traits, their habits, their stories. But no one can be understood in this way. Every human being is a universe in motion, changing from moment to moment. To understand someone is to freeze them in time, to hold a snapshot while the living reality flows on. We do this to ourselves as well. We create narratives about who we are. I am this kind of person. I believe in that. These statements bring comfort, but they also bring confinement. Understanding becomes a mirror that reflects not truth, but habit. The same mechanism governs our perception of reality. We think that once science has measured something, it is known. But science itself is a language game, a noble one, yes, but still a linguistic structure. Its equations are metaphors, its theories are stories told in the grammar of mathematics. They are not the universe, they are attempts to describe it in a syntax that humans can manipulate. The danger is not in science itself, but in forgetting that it, too, is myth, a mythology of precision. We replaced the gods with formulas, the sacred with statistics, and declared the mystery solved. But the mystery is not impressed. It keeps unfolding, indifferent to our claims of understanding. This is the great trick of language and mind, the illusion that understanding brings us closer to truth. In reality, understanding often stands between us and the truth. The truth is alive, dynamic, ungraspable. Understanding is static. It belongs, but wisdom is something deeper. It is the ability to stand in the unknown without trembling, to see that not knowing is not a flaw, but a feature of existence. Every mystic throughout history has warned against the tyranny of understanding. The Zen masters speak of beginner's mind, the state of openness before interpretation. The Sufi poets dissolve words in the wine of ecstasy. Even physics, at its furthest frontier, admits that the universe behaves in ways that defy logic. The deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. Yet we keep trying to domesticate the mystery, to put cosmic wildness into sentences. We are terrified of the idea that reality might be beyond comprehension, because that would mean the self, too, is beyond comprehension. And maybe that is the point. Maybe the universe was never meant to be understood. Maybe it was meant to be experienced. When you stand beneath the stars, you don't need to understand them to feel their beauty. When you fall in love, you don't analyze the equations of emotion. When you listen to music, you don't dissect the notes to find the meaning. The understanding is not the experience. It is what comes after, a translation for the fearful mind that cannot trust the rawness of being. To live in understanding is to live one step removed from life. We must learn to see understanding for what it is, a temporary bridge, not a destination. Use it, but do not worship it. Language and logic are marvelous servants but terrible masters. They can guide us through the practical world, but they cannot reveal the ultimate. The ultimate is beyond speech, beyond comprehension, beyond knowing. It can only be felt. The great irony is that the more we let go of the need to understand, the closer we come to truth. The moment we stop grasping, the truth slips gently into our hands, not as knowledge, but as presence. So when you next find yourself saying, "I understand," pause. Ask yourself, do you, really? Or have you merely built another comfortable wall against the infinite? Real understanding is not a conclusion. It is an awakening to mystery. It is the realization that nothing can be fully understood, and that this is not a failure, but a liberation. For when the mind surrenders its need to contain the universe, the heart finally becomes large enough to hold it. The great trick was never in the complexity of the world. The trick was in convincing you that it could be understood. Every cage has a maker, though the cleverest ones are built so that the prisoner never sees the architect. The prison of language, of ideas and categories, was not created by a single conspiracy. It was the slow, collective architecture of civilization itself. But within that vast system, there have always been those who learned how to exploit the structure. They discovered that whoever controls the words controls the world. The power to name things, to define them, is the deepest form of authority. To define is to dictate the limits of reality itself. And so, across ages, the architects of the linguistic trap have worn many masks: priest, teacher, ruler, scientist, influencer, all holding the same secret. If you can shape the language of a people, you can shape the scope of their thought. Long before screens glowed or algorithms whispered into minds, language was the first programming code. Ancient priests spoke in tongues that only they could interpret, holding secret alphabets that kept the divine under their custody. They told stories about gods and heavens, laws and punishments, spinning myths into the nervous systems of generations. Those myths became the software of early consciousness. The people believed not because they were weak, but because the stories were beautiful. and beauty is the most persuasive form of control. The architects understood that the way to bind minds was not through chains, but through meaning. Give a person a word like sin, and you have given them a leash they will wear willingly. Give them salvation, and they will walk wherever you lead them. As the centuries turned, the masks changed, but the structure remained. Kings and empires rose upon the scaffolding of sacred words: loyalty, patriotism, destiny. Every power requires a language to justify itself. A war cannot exist without the word enemy. An economy cannot function without the word value. Ideologies do not spread through violence, they spread through vocabulary. Each generation inherits not truth, but terminology. And within those words hide the invisible commands of history. Look around the modern world, and you will see the same priesthood wearing new robes. Corporations speak in the sacred dialect of innovation and growth. Governments invoke security and progress. The media chants the mantras of truth and objectivity. Yet beneath these holy words hides a machinery of influence, not through force, but through framing. When the frame is set, the picture inside is automatically interpreted. Say terrorist, and emotion locks the door on nuance. Say expert, and critical thought bows its head. Say normal, and everyone falls in line. These are not just words, they are command spells, keys that open and close perception. Language is how control becomes invisible. The architect does not need to imprison you. You imprison yourself by speaking the language they designed. You reinforce their world every time you use their words without questioning their origins. What does success really mean? To whom? What is freedom in a system that defines it only through consumption? We live in a linguistic hologram, a simulation held together by collective agreement. The trick is not that they lie to you, it is that they teach you the words by which you lie to yourself. Terence McKenna often said that reality is built out of language. The deeper implication is that those who manufacture the language manufacture reality. Modern culture is an empire of narratives, each one competing for your belief. Politics, religion, entertainment, all are just different software packages installed on the human mind. They give you a script and call it identity. They say, choose your tribe, and in doing so, you surrender the vastness of consciousness for the safety of a label. Republican, Democrat, believer, skeptic, winner, failure. These are not truths. They are coordinates within a system designed to make sure you never step outside the map. Notice how the system rewards those who speak fluently within its language. The experts, the pundits, the influencers. Their power lies in articulation. They can speak the code smoothly, reciting the slogans of progress, the equations of the economy, the algorithms of desire. They sound intelligent because they speak the dialect of the machine. But intelligence divorced from awareness is only compliance. The architects of the trap are not monsters. They are engineers. They built a world so dependent on language that silence became subversion. In a culture addicted to communication, the one who refuses to speak its terms becomes invisible. And invisibility is the only true freedom left. Look at how education itself functions, not as a cultivation of consciousness, but as a training in the approved vocabulary of the age. From the first years of school, we are taught not how to think, but how to articulate thoughts in the proper syntax of society. We memorize terms, formulas, historical narratives. We learn what counts as knowledge and what is dismissed as myth. We learn what is scientific and what is superstitious. Yet who decided these definitions? Who drew the line between real and unreal, fact and fiction? The architects did, long ago. Their descendants maintain the structure, not through cruelty, but through repetition. The system doesn't need tyrants anymore. It has teachers. Even our emotions have been linguistically colonized. We are told what to call our feelings, how to interpret them, when to express them. Sadness becomes depression. Rebellion becomes disorder. Wonder becomes naivete. The language of psychology, of medicine, of self-help, all of it claims to liberate us, but often it only redefines the prison. You may replace sin with trauma, confession with therapy, faith with science, but the structure remains the same. an external authority defining your inner world. Words replaced gods, and we still kneel to them. And then came technology, the cathedral of the new era. Now the architects are algorithms. They no longer need to persuade you with speeches. They can sculpt your reality silently through the words you see and repeat. Every search term, every headline, every trending phrase is a filament of the linguistic web tightening around the collective psyche. The feed tells you what to care about, what to fear, what to desire. And because it feels like choice, you do not resist. The digital priests no longer need commandments. They have data. You are not forced to believe. You are nudged, one word at a time, toward the narrative they have coded for you. But who are they, really? The answer is both simple and unsettling. They are us. We are all participants in the architecture. Every time we repeat a slogan, every time we accept a definition unexamined, every time we choose comfort over curiosity, we help maintain the illusion. The architects are not external villains. They are archetypes within the collective human psyche. The part of us that fears chaos and worships order, that chooses certainty over freedom. The trap persists because it fulfills a deep psychological need. The need to belong, to understand, to feel safe in an infinite cosmos that offers no guarantees. There is no need to hate the architects. They too are lost in their own spell. Their power depends on your belief, and belief is something you can withdraw at any moment. The key is not to fight the language, but to see through it. The moment you recognize a word as a construct, it loses its power over you. Freedom, truth, success, failure. All of these are masks that can be lifted to reveal the raw, silent reality beneath. When you see the mechanics of the spell dissolves. To awaken is not to invent new words, but to notice the space that exists before they are spoken, the living silence that cannot be programmed. The architects can manipulate only what is expressible. They cannot touch what is ineffable. Your direct experience, your inner awareness, your connection to the unspoken mystery, these remain outside the grid. No system of control can survive the presence of the unnameable. That is why silence has always been the greatest threat to power. So step back for a moment and look at the language that shapes your world. Ask, whose voice is this? Whose idea of reality am I repeating? Behind every word lies a history of influence, a lineage of control. But behind every silence lies a doorway, a passage back to the infinite. The architects may have built the structure, but the keys to the exit were hidden in plain sight. You carry them in your capacity to see, to question, to remain awake when the world wants you to dream in language. And perhaps that is the final irony. The architects built the trap so skillfully that it became a work of art. And within that art, consciousness learned to recognize itself. The same words that imprison us can also become ladders. The same stories that bind us can become mirrors. Once you realize that the architects are not your enemies, but your teachers in disguise, you can step beyond their world entirely. You become the witness, the one who sees the game for what it is. And by seeing it, you are free. We live in an age that worships certainty. It is the golden idol of modernity, the invisible religion that guides every conversation, every system, every belief. We are taught from birth that certainty is safety, that to know is to survive, and that to doubt is to drift into chaos. But beneath that illusion lies a secret. Certainty is not truth. It is comfort disguised as knowledge. It is the mirage we chase across the desert of the unknown, always thirsty, always convinced that this next idea, this next explanation, this next word will finally bring peace. Yet the closer we approach it, the more it shimmers, recedes, and reforms, a hologram built by the mind to protect itself from the terror of mystery. Certainty is the child of language. Once we began to name the world, we began to believe that we understood it. We thought that by labeling the storm, we had mastered the weather. We believed that by classifying life, we had discovered its meaning. The mind craves solidity, and language gives it the illusion of structure. This is a tree. That is the self. This is good. That is evil. The world, once fluid and shimmering, becomes a catalogue of definitions. And from those definitions arises a strange stillness, not the stillness of peace, but of paralysis. We begin to live inside an image of reality instead of reality itself. Certainty is seductive because it feels like clarity. It gives the mind something to hold, something to rest upon. But clarity without humility is blindness. The moment we say, "I know," we stop seeing. We stop listening. We stop feeling the raw pulse of being. The certainty of knowledge replaces the openness of wonder. And this is how the living mystery of the universe turns into the dull repetition of human opinion. The mirage of certainty keeps us safe from the vast, trembling beauty of not knowing. Look at how society is built upon this addiction. Religion promises eternal truths. Science promises measurable truths. Politics promises moral truths. Every institution thrives by claiming to know what cannot truly be known. People gather around these certainties like tribes around campfires, repeating the stories that keep their worlds coherent. We are right. They are wrong. This is progress. That is regression. Yet beneath every absolute, there is the silent scream of the unacknowledged unknown. Certainty builds civilizations, but it also builds prisons. It creates order, but it suffocates possibility. Terence McKenna once said that culture is a kind of operating system, and certainty is its core program. The function of culture is not to reveal truth, but to maintain coherence. It filters out the unknown so that people can function, trade, and obey. But this coherence comes at a cost: the death of imagination. When you are certain, you no longer explore. When you are certain, you no longer listen to the whisper of the possible. Certainty closes the window to the infinite and nails it shut in the name of reason. The great human tragedy is that we confuse certainty with wisdom when, in truth, they are opposites. Wisdom begins where certainty ends. Think of the scientific mind at its best: curious, open, self-correcting. That is the spirit of discovery. But when science hardens into dogma, it becomes indistinguishable from religion. When theories become unquestionable, when data replaces direct experience, when skepticism is reserved only for others, the mirage of certainty has won again. The map becomes the territory. The formula replaces the phenomenon. And humanity, once again, worships at the altar of its own reflection. The danger of certainty is not merely intellectual, it is existential. It numbs us to the living strangeness of the world. When we think we understand life, we stop seeing it as alive. We look at the stars and see only numbers, not gods. We look at the forest and see only resources, not spirits. We look at each other and see only roles, not souls. Certainty strips the sacred from perception. It replaces wonder with management, participation with control. The more certain we become, the more lifeless the world appears, until, at last, we find ourselves surrounded not by reality, but by our own definitions of it. But the universe does not care for our definitions. It continues to shift and shimmer beneath the surface of our certainty. Every truth we discover eventually dissolves into a larger mystery. Every conclusion opens a new question. What we call laws of nature are simply patterns of stability observed within a vast chaos. Even the constants of physics whisper impermanence when seen closely enough. The deeper we look, the less solid reality becomes. Particles blur into probability. Matter melts into vibration. The foundation of everything dissolves into uncertainty. And yet, instead of embracing this revelation as liberation, we turn away in fear. We prefer the illusion of a solid world to the ecstasy of a fluid one. Why? Because certainty gives us identity. It tells us who we are and where we belong. It gives us a script to perform. To question it feels like death, the death of the self that clings to its definitions. I am this. I believe that. I know what is true. But what if all of that is smoke? What if identity itself is another linguistic mirage? another trick of the mind to keep itself intact. The ego feeds on certainty like a flame feeds on oxygen. It would rather burn forever in illusion than dissolve into the cool vastness of the unknown. Yet that vastness, that is where truth actually lives. The mirage of certainty has another name: control. We seek to control the external world because we cannot control the internal one. We build systems, technologies, and doctrines to protect ourselves from chaos, not realizing that chaos is the mother of creation. The universe was born from it. Life depends on it. The attempt to eliminate uncertainty is the attempt to eliminate life itself. When everything is predictable, nothing is alive. Certainty freezes the river of becoming. It kills the spontaneity that gives existence its beauty. To awaken from this mirage is not easy. It means allowing the ground beneath your beliefs to crumble. It means accepting that your understanding of reality has always been provisional, a temporary agreement between perception and language. It means standing naked before the mystery, without the armor of explanation. At first, it feels like falling. But soon you realize that you are not falling into chaos. You are falling into truth. The unknown is not your enemy. It is your home. You begin to see that uncertainty is not a void, but a field of infinite potential. Every possibility lives there, waiting to be born. When you let go of certainty, you re-enter the dance of creation. You stop being a spectator of reality and become its co-creator. You realize that every moment is new, every perception is unique, every word is a doorway. The world is not fixed, it is unfolding through you. And in that realization, the old anxiety of not knowing transforms into a luminous freedom. There is a kind of joy that only the uncertain can feel, the joy of discovery without destination. To live without certainty is to live in wonder. It is to see that every belief is a temporary costume worn by the infinite. It is to understand that even this sentence, even this thought, is only a finger pointing toward the unspeakable. Certainty builds walls. Wonder builds wings. The moment you allow yourself to be uncertain, you step beyond the reach of the architects, beyond the control of language, beyond the hypnosis of the collective dream. The great masters, from Buddha to McKenna, all pointed to the same paradox. To awaken, you must learn to be utterly uncertain. Not uncertain in despair, but uncertain in awe. The difference is subtle but profound. Despair says, I know nothing, and therefore I am lost. Awe says, I know nothing, and therefore everything is possible. The mind resists this because it cannot calculate the infinite, but the heart understands it instantly. The heart does not need certainty to love. It does not need explanation to beat. It simply participates in the mystery. So let the mirage dissolve. Let the horizon shimmer and break apart. Let your definitions melt back into silence. For in that silence, you will feel something ancient moving, the pulse of the real, uncontained by words, unmeasured by logic. You will realize that the universe never asked to be understood. It asked to be witnessed. And that witnessing, pure, wordless, awake, is the only truth that was ever real. Certainty is a mirage because the desert was never empty. It was always alive, shimmering with possibilities. You were never lost in the unknown. You were lost in the illusion of knowing. The moment you stop chasing the mirage, you find yourself standing in an oasis that was always here. The living, breathing mystery of existence itself. There comes a point when words begin to taste like dust. When you realize that every explanation, every philosophy, every beautiful system of thought is just another reflection of the same prison walls. The mind, exhausted by its own endless attempts to capture truth, begins to hear something else, something quieter, something alive beneath the noise. This is the call of silence, the forgotten language that predates all language. It does not argue, it does not explain, it simply is. And in its stillness, everything that was hidden begins to reveal itself. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of interference. It is the original state of consciousness before the static of words began. In silence, perception is no longer filtered through definitions or categories. Things return to their naked being. The tree is no longer a tree. It is texture, color, vibration, existence itself blooming. The sky is no longer sky. It is infinite openness, the canvas of being. Silence dissolves the labels that divide the world, and what remains is unity. But escaping into silence is not as simple as closing your mouth. The noise is not outside, it is inside. The mind has become an echo chamber of borrowed voices, a constant narration that comments, compares, judges, and categorizes. Even when you sit alone in a quiet room, the chatter continues. The inner voice repeats the world's vocabulary like a mantra of control. You have been trained to think in language, to perceive through the dictionary of the tribe. The escape, therefore, is not physical, but existential. To enter silence is to exit the linguistic matrix itself. How does one do that? Through surrender, through remembering how to listen. Meditation, psychedelics, deep contemplation, all are merely doors back into the same house, the house of direct experience. In the psychedelic state, for example, language collapses. Words lose meaning. Reality becomes pure texture, pure pattern, pure energy. You realize that language was not describing the world, it was limiting it. In that wordless immersion, consciousness expands into something vast and impersonal. You see, not through thought, but through being. McKenna often spoke of the felt presence of direct experience. That phrase is the key. To feel presence is to see beyond description. It is to meet existence without mediation. In that meeting, understanding arises not as an idea, but as a vibration, a resonance between self and world. Silence is not dumb, it is eloquent beyond measure. It communicates through intuition, through synchronicity, through the subtle harmonies of form and rhythm. When you are silent, you begin to hear reality singing itself. Our culture fears silence because silence cannot be monetized, cannot be measured, cannot be controlled. We fill every space with sound, every pause with words, every thought with analysis. The moment quiet arrives, we feel unease, as if something essential is missing. But the truth is the opposite. Silence is the fullness we have forgotten. It is the ground from which thought arises, the ocean beneath the waves. The fear of silence is the fear of meeting yourself, not the social self built from language, but the eternal awareness that watches behind it. To escape through silence is to die before you die. It is to let the chatter of the mind collapse like an old empire. At first, it feels like disorientation. You reach for familiar concepts. Who am I? What is happening? But they no longer hold. The self, which was once so solid, begins to dissolve. It is terrifying only if you try to hold on. The moment you let go, the terror becomes ecstasy. You realize that what you thought was you was only a sentence, a narrative written in the grammar of culture. Beneath it lies something wordless, infinite, and untouched. That is the real you, not the speaker, but the silence in which speech occurs. In that space, time begins to lose its grip. Without words, there are no tenses, no past, no future, only the eternal now. Memory becomes fluid. The boundaries between subject and object blur. You no longer stand apart from the world observing it. You are the world observing itself. The veil of separation that language created begins to thin. You understand, not intellectually, but experientially, that the tree is not a thing out there. It is an extension of your own perception, your own being reflecting itself in form. You are not seeing the world, you are the seeing itself. This realization cannot be taught, only experienced. That is why mystics and shamans always speak in paradoxes. Their words are attempts to gesture toward what lies beyond words. Silence is the teacher they serve. It is the void that births all form. When the mind bows to it, revelation happens. You realize that silence is not the absence of meaning. It is the source of meaning. Every sound, every thought, Every heartbeat emerges from it and returns to it. Silence is the womb of creation. In this state, communication takes on a new form. You no longer speak at the world, you speak with it. Words arise naturally, like waves on the surface of the ocean, and just as easily, they dissolve. There is no effort to convince, no need to defend. Language becomes play again, a sacred art rather than a weapon of certainty. You speak not to define, but to celebrate. You use words the way a musician uses notes, not to explain the world, but to let it sing. But the return to silence is not an escape from life. It is the deepening of life. The silent mind is not empty. It is attentive. It hears subtleties that the noisy mind misses. The rustle of leaves, the rhythm of breath, the heartbeat of the earth itself. You begin to perceive reality as alive, intelligent, responsive. The cosmos reveals itself as a conversation, not a conversation in words, but in resonance. The wind moves, the stars turn, your thoughts ripple, and all of it is part of one continuous dialogue between consciousness and creation. Through silence, compassion arises naturally. When the noise of self-interest fades, you begin to feel others as yourself. There is no need for moral commandments. Empathy becomes instinctive. You see that every being, every creature, is an expression of the same silence manifesting in different forms. To harm another is to harm yourself. To love another is to recognize yourself. This is the ethical dimension of awakening, not imposed from outside, but blooming naturally from within. Silence also reveals the illusion of control. When you sit quietly, without trying to manipulate reality, you notice that life continues perfectly on its own. The heart beats, the breath flows, thoughts rise and fall like waves. You realize that existence does not need your interference. The universe is not something to be managed, it is something to be trusted. Control dissolves into participation. You stop grasping and start flowing. This is true freedom, not the freedom to dominate, but the freedom to surrender. And in that surrender, the last remnants of fear vanish. Because fear depends on separation, on the idea of me and not me. In silence, that distinction collapses. What could there be to fear when everything is you? The ocean cannot fear its own waves. The universe cannot fear its own unfolding. Fear only exists in the chatter of the mind. When the chatter stops, only peace remains, not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of union. It is ironic that to escape the prison of language, you must pass through the same gate that language built. Awareness. You cannot force silence, because forcing is noise. You can only invite it, like a lover or a dawn. Sit quietly, breathe, watch the mind spin its stories, and then, gently, without judgment, let them go. Beneath the words, beneath the thoughts, beneath even the sense of I, there it is, a stillness so profound it feels like eternity holding its breath. That stillness is the real world, the one that language could only ever hint at. When you return from silence, you do not lose language, you reclaim it. Words become transparent again, humble servants of truth instead of masters of illusion. You begin to speak from the heart of silence, and your voice carries a different vibration, not the brittle tone of argument, but the calm resonance of being. The true mystic, the true artist, the true lover, all speak from this place. Their words awaken, not because they explain, but because they remind. They remind you of what you already are beneath the noise. To escape through silence is not to reject the world, but to rediscover it. It is to step out of the dream of explanations and into the living reality of experience. It is to realize that the universe was never silent at all. It was always singing, but we were too loud to hear. The escape is not upward, not outward, but inward, into the space where sound is born and meaning dissolves. And there, in that still point between thought and being, the infinite opens its eyes through you. You do not find silence. Silence finds you when you stop searching. And when it does, you understand, without words, without certainty, without self, that you were never trapped at all. The door was always open, the world was always whole, and the silence was never empty. It was full of the universe dreaming itself into speech. At the end of all words, there is a kind of homecoming. It is not a return to what was known, but to what has always been, that quiet pulse of awareness untouched by language, identity, or belief. Once the noise of thought subsides, once the machinery of explanation grows tired, something ancient stirs behind the silence. You begin to sense that understanding was never the destination, only the veil. The mind has spent a lifetime chasing meaning, as if it were a treasure buried at the end of time. But meaning, like all human inventions, is a mirage drawn on the sand. The wind of truth erases it effortlessly. What remains when all meanings dissolve is not emptiness. It is life, luminous and immediate, finally seen as it truly is. Meaning is a human reflex, a survival mechanism disguised as philosophy. We construct it the way a spider spins a web, instinctively, continuously, not because the world demands it, but because it is our nature to weave. Every religion, every science, every story humanity has ever told is a filament in that web, stretched between the twin poles of fear and wonder. We cannot stand in the raw openness of existence without reaching for patterns, for reasons, for the illusion that this means that. But the cosmos has no need for justification. It simply is. Meaning was our way of taming the infinite, of wrapping the wildness of being into something the human mind could sit beside without trembling. The tragedy and beauty of language is that it offered us the illusion of control. We thought we were explaining the universe, but we were only narrating ourselves into existence. Every I am was a spell, a charm cast against the chaos of the unknown. For a while, it worked. We built civilizations on these spells. We built morality, art, science, the intricate towers of human order. But as the centuries passed, the foundations began to shake. The deeper we looked into the universe, the less sense it made. The deeper we looked into ourselves, the less solid we became. At the subatomic level, certainty vanished. At the psychological level, identity fractured. The message was clear. Reality refuses to be contained by meaning. When you begin to see this, there is a moment of vertigo. The scaffolding of interpretation starts to fall away, and what's left is terrifyingly simple. Direct experience. You look around and realize that everything you thought you knew was a translation. The tree outside your window, the sound of rain, even the feeling of being you, all of it filtered through the prism of concepts. And now, suddenly, the prism cracks. The light pours through unmediated. There are no words for this kind of seeing. It is not mystical in the way people imagine. No thunderclap of enlightenment. No divine figure waiting at the end. It is quieter, more intimate. It is the realization that the universe was never speaking in symbols. It was always speaking in itself. Meaning is what stands between perception and participation. The mind says, this is what it means, and in doing so, steps outside the flow. But when the mind falls silent, perception merges with what is perceived. The dancer becomes the dance. The observer becomes the observed. Life is no longer something happening to you. It is something happening as you. This is the return beyond meaning, the re-entry into the living fabric of reality, where there is no separation between word and world, self and cosmos. You become, as McKenna might say, the witness of the mystery without needing to reduce it. And something extraordinary happens in this state. Joy arises. Not the joy of achievement or comprehension, but the pure joy of being. It has no reason, no object. It flows effortlessly, like sunlight or laughter. It is the original current of existence, buried for so long beneath the debris of thought. You realize that all your searching, through books, through teachers, through philosophies, was an elaborate detour back to this, to being here, now, without needing to understand. You see that the meaning of life was never hidden in words. it was hidden by them. When you live beyond meaning, language does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes play again. Words stop pretending to be reality and start dancing around it like flames around a fire. Poetry, music, art. These are the gestures of a mind that has remembered how to speak without claiming truth. The poet does not say, "This is," but "perhaps." The artist does not describe the world, but invites it to reveal itself. Language used in this way becomes sacred again, not as dogma, but as devotion. Every word becomes a doorway, not a wall. In the silence beyond meaning, compassion also deepens. You begin to see that everyone is lost in their own web of language, trying desperately to define themselves against the void. You see the futility and the beauty of it. The scientist, the priest, the skeptic, the believer, all spinning meaning to stay afloat in the same ocean. You no longer need to argue or convince. You no longer need to be right. You simply see the shared innocence beneath all our attempts to explain. In that seeing, love arises naturally, not sentimental love, but the vast, impersonal love of awareness, recognizing itself in everything. It becomes clear that there was never a trap to escape, only a trance to awaken from. Language, culture, meaning, they were never the enemy. They were the dream through which consciousness explored itself. The prison was never real. It was a theater for evolution. You, the dreamer, built it to learn how to wake. Every word that once confined you was also guiding you, like stepping stones across the river of confusion. Now, having crossed, you can look back and bow. Even the illusion had purpose. Even the trap was part of the journey toward freedom. To live beyond meaning is not to abandon the world, but to enter it more fully. When you are no longer obsessed with decoding reality, you can finally touch it. You notice the smallest things, the texture of air on your skin, the glint of sunlight on a glass, the quiet hum beneath all things. These are not signs pointing to something else. They are the something else. Existence itself is the revelation. There is no hidden message waiting to be discovered, no grand truth at the end of the path. The path is the truth. The dance is the purpose. And yet, even in this state of liberation, the mind occasionally reaches out, asking, "But what does it mean?" That is its nature. The difference now is that you can smile at it. You no longer need to silence the mind. You simply see through it. Meaning continues to arise, but it is transparent, like a rainbow, beautiful, ephemeral, and harmless. You play along, knowing that the play is divine. You can speak, write, think, love, create. But you are no longer bound by the illusion that these gestures must signify something beyond themselves. They are enough. Life is enough. When you return to the world after glimpsing what lies beyond meaning, everything looks the same but feels different. The city is still loud, the people still busy, the language still humming. But now you see the music behind the noise. You see that every person is an expression of the same silence wearing different syllables. You see that the world is not broken, it is dreaming. And your role is not to wake it up, but to dance gently within its dream, carrying the fragrance of what you've seen. The return beyond meaning is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of real participation. You become both silent and expressive, empty and full, human and infinite. You live as the paradox itself, the word and the silence that holds it. You understand that the universe has been speaking through you all along, using your voice, your thoughts, your questions. Every heartbeat, every breath, every gaze is the cosmos contemplating itself. And perhaps that is the final revelation. You were never meant to escape language, only to remember that it was never separate from silence. The two are one, the inhale and exhale of creation. Silence gives birth to the word returns to silence. Together, they form the heartbeat of being. Meaning and mystery are not opposites. They are lovers in an endless embrace. Once you see this, you stop searching for truth and start living it. So you sit quietly, watching the play unfold, the conversations, the conflicts, the laughter, the sorrow, and you feel an ancient smile form within you. You know now that every word, every gesture, every life is a note in the same cosmic song. You do not need to understand the melody to dance to it. You do not need to know where it leads. It is enough to feel it moving through you. This endless song of being, this silence that speaks in the language of stars. The return beyond meaning is not a destination. It is a realization. You were never separate from the truth you sought. The silence you longed for was listening through your own ears. The universe was never trying to tell you what it meant. It was simply asking you to notice that it is. And in that noticing, the great circle closes. The word dissolves into silence. The silence blooms into sound, and existence continues, forever speaking, forever beyond the need to be understood.